Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to another edition of Facebook Live here with the TCU Office of Admission. My name is Heath Einstein, and I have the great pleasure of serving TCU as Dean of Admission. And it is wonderful to see all of you here. Hello, Melissa from Boston, and Max from New York, and Karina from Chicago, and Brinkley from Virginia, and John from Illinois, and so on and so on. And I love the geographic diversity that we see amongst our viewers right now because it is really reflective of our student body here at TCU. For all of our programs, you may know this, we start with a land acknowledgement because we are on sacred land at TCU. We pay homage to all Native peoples who have lived here since time immemorial. And in particular, we honor the Wichita and affiliated tribes upon whose ancestral homeland TCU is located. We do these Facebook Live events every month or so. And if you've been with us before, you know they are unscripted. I don't know what I'm going to say 1 second from now, let alone 10 minutes from now. So that's part of the fun of the event. I'll talk for a few minutes. I'm going to allow my esteemed colleagues also to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get to your questions. So please, if you haven't done so already, start typing in your questions now to the comment section. We are going to get to as many of them as possible. Tonight's theme is application tips, and the timing is good. We intentionally did this at the beginning of the fall semester because we are now about a month and a half out from our first deadline. And that gives you an opportunity to take some of the advice that we are going to impart this evening and apply it to your application for admission to the university. So hopefully you find this next 57 or so minutes useful. If we veer into other topics about admissions at TCU, that's fine. But we're going to try to keep the focus on the application process. This is scheduled to go until 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time. If it falls a little short or goes a little over, so be it. But I think we're going to fill the hour because there are going to be lots and lots of questions. Okay, before we get to our other introductions, I just want to offer some gratitude to two individuals you do not currently see, but they are here behind the curtains. Liz Rainwater from the Office of Admission and Rob Berline from the Alumni Office at TCU. They are making sure that we are operating here in this event. So thank you very much to Liz and to Rob. Okay. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues for a brief introduction. Jill, let's start with you. Hi, good to see you.
Hey, hi everybody. This is a bucket list item. I don't think I've ever streamed or done anything quite like this, so it'll be awkward for me. But hi everybody, I'm Jill Countryman. I'm the Regional Director of Admission for TCU. I've been at TCU since 2005. I work with students in 6 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. If you live in one of those states, you're stuck with me. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks, Jill. Hey, Larissa, what's going on?
Hello, everyone. So glad to be here with y'all this evening. My name is Larissa Marple. I have worked at TCU for about 2 years now, which is super fun. I'm also a TCU grad, go Frogs, graduated back in 2015, and I'm so glad to be back at my alma mater. I recruit for TCU admissions in the Pacific Northwest, so Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and then I also have a couple of Dallas-Fort Worth school districts, including Aledo ISD, HEB ISD, Louisville, and Allen. So if you are from any of those school districts or any of those states, I am your admission counselor. I can't wait to read your applications.
Thank you, Larissa. Okay, now before we get to the questions, I want everyone to know you are participating in something that is very special. This is an award-winning Facebook Live event that you're participating in. Okay, we had to get that out of the way. You might see that 1 or 2 or 6 more times before we finish this evening. All right, let's go to our first question. And we asked on social media ahead of time if anybody had questions. So some came in via Instagram. And we know there are some people who are participating tonight via Facebook, others via YouTube. And again, get those questions into the chat. The first question comes from Jules. And this came in via Instagram. Are early decision applicants considered for scholarships? That's a great question. Jill, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, I get this question all the time. I don't know why, but it's evidently a very important question out there in the universe. Absolutely. Students who apply early decision contract binding, just like students that apply early action non-binding, are reviewed for not only admission, but also academic merit scholarships. So if a student who was admitted early decision did not get an academic scholarship, they would not have gotten a scholarship if they would have applied early action. Everybody goes through the same process regardless of the application.
Yeah, Jill, I think it's such a great answer. And I was talking to some parents yesterday. So we had our Monday at TCU event on campus, which we offer about 7 times throughout the year. It's a great program if you haven't attended. And we do a parent talk. And this question came up in each of the 3 parent talk sessions that we had. And I think what this stems from is the idea that if the university knows that the student is going to enroll no matter what, what's the incentive from the university side to give a scholarship? And our position is it would be completely unethical to not give money to the student who has earned it in our system just by virtue of the fact that they're committing to us. So it's a wonderful question, and Jill, you gave a great answer. So thank you for that. So we started with a question about early decision. CCA Gomez, also on Instagram, asked, what's the difference between early decision 1 and early decision 2? So Larissa, what's your response to that?
Yeah, great question. So the biggest difference is just the date, right? So early decision 1 is a November 1st deadline, and early decision 2 is a February 1st deadline. Truly, that's the biggest difference. We've had early decision 2 now for a couple of years, and we've seen it utilized by different populations of students. Might be by students who weren't sure about TCU and maybe hadn't had the opportunity to come on campus, but by February 1st, they did know that TCU was their number 1 choice. Potentially, they had applied earlier to early action and were deferred. And so then they decided to be early decision 2, and or they may not have gotten into another school that had been their number 1 choice and TCU was their number 2 choice. And so once they received that decision, they wanted to apply early decision 2, knowing at that point in the process that TCU was their number 1 choice. So all great options, but really the only difference between the 2 is going to be the deadline date when the application is due and when you get a decision from us.
Great. Thank you for that answer. Okay, Jill, I'm going to throw the next one to you. Danielle on YouTube asks us, does TCU require the applicant to apply declaring a major, or can you apply as undecided?
Great question, Danielle. At TCU, students absolutely can list a major, but if a student wants to keep their options open and choose from the scroll down, undecided, or what we call at TCU pre-major, that's absolutely fine with us. We offer about 130 different majors and minors at TCU, and the goal for students coming on board to TCU with keeping their options open is that along the way, during the first year or 2, you come into contact with a major that just really makes you smile and makes you want to have a career in that. So absolutely, undecided, or what we call pre-major, works just great at TCU.
Great. Thank you. Okay, another question we got via YouTube is how many outside recommenders are suggested? So Larissa, can you talk about just the recommendation process in general, what's required, and then what's recommended?
Yeah, absolutely. So the TCU application requires 2 letters of recommendation, 1 from a teacher and 1 from a counselor at your high school. And this gives us a really good perspective on who you are as a person inside the classroom, what your academic standards are, and also what you're like outside the classroom with that counselor perspective. There aren't any others that are required. However, if there is someone in your life that you have a really close relationship with that you think has the ability to speak to some of your abilities or characteristics that your teacher or counselor may not be able to speak to. For instance, if you are really involved or you have a leadership position on an athletics team or a club or organization, and your teacher and counselor may not necessarily have that perspective on you, that can be a great person to add. There's not a limit as to how many you add, but we do ask that you're thoughtful in the ones that you submit so that everyone who's submitting a recommendation for you is speaking to different attributes you have. your recommenders are going to say you're wonderful because you absolutely are, and we want to see that. But we just want to make sure that they're being thoughtful and we're not just getting the same information over and over. So only requirement are the teacher and the counselor. But if there's one or maybe two other people that see you in a different light, you're welcome to submit those as well.
Great answer. Thank you. Okay. We started by asking about early decision. Sydney Oaks asks a really good clarifying question. Hey, what's the difference between early decision and early action? Jill, can you give a response to Sydney?
Okay, Sydney, here we go. Early decision is contract binding. So if a student applies early decision, part of their application process will be the early decision form. And you as a student would sign it, a parent would sign it, and then your school counselor would sign off on it. And what you're signing is, hey, TCU, yes, I know I'm applying early decision, and I promise, if admitted, I am coming to TCU. I am locking myself in. Early action, on the other hand, is for those students that, of course, love TCU, but they want to apply without a contract binding commitment to attend TCU if admitted. So if a student applies early action and they're admitted, fingers crossed, that student has until midnight on May 1st to let us know if they want to be at TCU or not. So early decision, think about it this way. You've made your decision. If I'm admitted, I'm coming. Early action is non-binding, and you have until midnight, May 1st, to decide if you want to be at TCU.
Great. Thank you. All right, let's move on to a topic that is atop many students' minds, and that is the application essay. It probably takes more time for a student to work on that part of the application than any other component. So Tanya asks, any pointers on a successful application essay? And I think maybe, Larissa, I'll start with you, but Jill, I'm going to ask you to chime in here too, because you both have different perspectives and there are lots of things we could say about the essay. So Larissa, what would you say?
Yeah, I can get us started. So when I think about a student submitting their application essay, as someone who reads them, my greatest goal and hope for students when I'm reading their applications is that I'm going to get to know that student in a way that the rest of their application doesn't necessarily showcase. So students have the option, or the process of the essay is that it's a personal narrative. This is not them citing facts or sources. It's a personal narrative, and we really want to get to know the student. TCU does a holistic review of our applicants, and that means that, yes, we're absolutely looking at their academic rigor, but we're also just looking at who are they as a person. We want to attract students to TCU and enroll students who are mission driven, right? They are ethical leaders, responsible citizens. We want to learn that about them in their application essay. And so that's really what we're looking for. My tip is to make it personal, do some edits, and also it's great to have someone that doesn't necessarily know the student read and give edits so that they understand what us as an application reader might be reading in that perspective. As a parent, as a teacher, when you know the student really well, it can be harder to have that perspective on how the essay is actually sounding to a third party. So I always recommend getting someone that's a classmate or a teacher that they're not as close to also give edits. But really, that's what I'm looking for. But Jill, go for it. I know that this is always a hot question in the application process.
Yeah, I actually helped with a couple of essay writing workshops over the summer in the Chicago suburbs. And I think, just to sum up what Larissa has mentioned, good rule of thumb, if your best friend could write the same exact essay, then it's not unique enough about your story. So my advice would just be, remember a funnel. You know, a funnel is shaped like this. So don't tell me about your great experience on your church mission trip. Don't tell me what you did on day 1 and day 2 and day 3. What I would love for you to do is funnel it and come down to a very precise moment. There was maybe like a light bulb moment for you, something that changed your attitude about something. So just remember to funnel and not give us a whole story. Bring it in, dial it in, zoom in, and provide us with information about something that moved you or that changed your outlook.
I love both of your responses. And the only other tips I might give, just to offer some additional advice would be, number one, make sure you're writing it well. We so often focus on the topic and message and all that, but also this is a measure of how well you write. No matter what your major is in college, we want to make sure that you can write well. And then also, don't try to write the world's greatest college essay. I think that's like a really tall task, right? That's a bar that would be really difficult to scale. If instead you say, what's a really effective piece of writing about me that, as Larissa and Jill are both saying, are individual, that makes the task maybe a little less daunting. And we know that the likelihood is you have not like scaled Kilimanjaro or cured some insidious disease. Like that's not our expectation of you. We know that for most people, they've led a fairly routine 17-year life up to this point. And that's okay. So just do a great job with your authentic voice and you'll be great. Which leads into another very interesting question by A.B. Lashley, which is curious to hear your take on how TCU will navigate to maintain the integrity of the essay process, given the increasing prevalence of AI. So I don't want to assign one of you this question. Do either of you want to address it? And if not, I can say something about it too. But it's very interesting, y'all, because this is actually a topic that we talked about this summer at a staff training. So this is not something that is new information to college admission offices. It is something that we're very much grappling with. So I don't know, Larissa or Jill, do you have any initial thoughts? And okay to say no.
I think my initial thought, and Heath, please expand on this, but when students are utilizing AI, they're utilizing a tool in their toolbox, just like they're utilizing a counselor or a teacher or a parent who's assisting them with writing their essay. Now, with that being said, when we're reading college essays, we can usually tell if a parent has written it. Just like when we're reading it, we can probably tell if it was fully generated by AI because it doesn't sound human in the same way that it does when a student is writing from their own perspective, just like a parent perspective doesn't sound the same as a student's. And so I know that doesn't clearly answer the question, but I don't think we're viewing it as some horrible, scary thing. I think we're viewing it as it's a tool in their toolbox. However, if they submit something to us that clearly wasn't written by them, whether it's written by AI or something else, we don't love that, right? And we are able to notice that because the human component is missing. So that's my initial reaction, but Heath, happy to hear what you have to say as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, Larissa. I would add a couple of additional points. One is that when a student submits the application for admission, they actually sign a series of acknowledgments, that one of which is that the work is your own. And so we take students at their word. When they submit an application, we assume it is their work. That does not mean that an essay hasn't been seen by other entities, human or otherwise, and that's okay. But we expect that students will honor their end of the agreement, and we will honor our end of the agreement as well. And I agree with Larissa. If we think of essay writing as an iterative process, it can be a very nice place to begin, because let's be honest, a lot of students don't know where to begin and maybe lack the resources at their schools to have a counselor who can help them through that process, or a teacher who knows them super well. So in a sense, it can help level the playing field if you use it as a way to sort of generate some ideas, but the work certainly should be the students. I'll make one other point about the sort of quality of the writing. And that is, even in cases where we couldn't necessarily tell that it's an AI generated essay versus a human essay, the chances that the AI generated essay is an awesome essay isn't real high. We've looked at a lot of these ChatGPT essays and so forth, and usually they're just sort of like ho-hum college essays. That's not going to help the student. So if your goal is to write a great college essay, then you ought to be in charge of writing that great college essay. Okay, let's go to a question that Logan asked. And again, it goes back to this early decision topic and scholarships. And the question is, will you know the scholarship amount before your decision is binded? And that's a really good question because we talked about the binding nature of the early decision application. So Jill, do you want to address that?
I am happy to address it. Heath, you might need to jump in though, but students will not know, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what your academic scholarship will be because it's based upon our entire applicant group for November 1st. And we have to wait and kind of see, with that pool of applicants, like, what are the strongest, unweighted GPAs? What are the strongest level of, rigorous coursework? Some students apply with test scores, some do not. So there are a lot of moving parts that both the admission committee and the scholarship committee need to take into consideration. So I would say, if you have a counselor at your school or you're online, if you look at last year's data about the average for unweighted GPA or ACT or SAT, that's not saying that's what will happen this year, but it gives you kind of a ballpark of what has happened most recently. So no, you won't know what your scholarship is, ahead of time. So that's one of the risky things about early decision and why you need a parent to sign off and a counselor to sign off as well. And Heath, I'm sure you have some things that you'd like to add to that.
No, you did an awesome job. The only other thing I would add is that TCU, like every other college, is required by law to have on their website something called the net price calculator. So you can plug in some of your financial information to get an estimate of what your scholarship and aid package might look like. However, it is just an estimate. And because the inputs aren't as complete as what you're going to be required to put on your financial aid forms, sometimes it's not precise. And so I think it's a good sort of directional indicator, but I'd be careful. And that's why we really encourage students for whom aid offers will be the determinant to hold off and apply early action instead of early decision. Most of the students who come to TCU do not come via that binding early decision. So there's plenty of space available for students who are not going that route. Okay, it's time to take a little bit of a break. Hold on one second, everybody. Let's see if I can get this on. Okay. Jill, Larissa, you know it and you love it. It's time for the dad jokes. Okay, in case you can't see the shirt. Okay, this was a gift from my family. Are you ready? Okay, here's number. I don't want to. This isn't exactly a competition, but bragging rights are at stake here. Okay, so here's the question. How do you organize a space party? How do you organize a space party? Okay, 3, 2, 1. You're going to kick yourselves, guys. You plan it. See what we did there? Okay. All right. There will be other opportunities to win great prizes of $0 value. All right. So speaking of early decision and early action, this actually leads into a great question that McKenna has. Does it look bad on my application if I applied for early decision and had to change to early action because of a parent not signing the contract, which I think, Jill, you mentioned the needing to sign that contract. So Larissa, does it look bad?
No, I don't. Yeah. Is the short answer. No.
It really doesn't. It's a simple answer. I think a lot of students apply early decision. Obviously, we're the top choice school, and they want us to know that, and they want us to demonstrate their interest in us, and applying early decision is a way to do that. But there are plenty of other ways that students can demonstrate interest in the university. And there are lots of early action students, and for that matter, regular decision students whose applications we see, and they're very clearly interested in TCU. And we pick up on that. So I think you're exactly right. Okay, Jill, Kim asks, is there a benefit to submitting your application now versus right before the due date for early action? What would you say to that?
Well, I would tell them the same thing I told the students at Hinsdale Central High School in Illinois today. If a student applied August 15th, September 15th, October 15th, or at 11:59 p.m. on November 1st, there's always one person who does that, they're going to get their decision on the same date. So there's not any advantage to apply early because we post decisions on the same date. But in terms of self-satisfaction and being scheduled and taking some stress off your shoulders, absolutely, it is better to send it in early and get that taken care of right away.
And Larissa, Jill just mentioned that no matter when you apply, as long as you meet that deadline, you'll find out at the same time. So Lois asks, when do those decisions come out? When can early action applicants expect to hear from us? And I would add, when should early decision students hear from us? What are those dates? Do we know those?
Yeah, great question. So we don't have specific dates. However, we always guarantee that decisions come out before January 1st. Our goal is to release them sooner. We like to go on holiday break. We know you have holiday break. So our goal is to release early decision in the first couple weeks of December and early action sometime in the middle of December. We don't have a specific date, but it is always guaranteed prior to January 1st. And then if you apply for regular decision or early decision 2, we release those prior to April 1st. So we give ourselves a 2-month window to get those applications read and decisions made and turned back around to you.
Wonderful. Okay, Claudia asks, we tuned in a couple of minutes late, wondering if we missed the opening dad joke. No, the one that we just did like 5 minutes ago. I think you were already tuned in then. You got the first dad joke of the evening. So hopefully you got the answer right on that one. Okay, so next, this is sort of an open-ended question that Raina asks, and that is, what do admission officers specifically look for in applicants? So Jill, I'll start with you because I suspect that there may be, there's a general answer that we might all give, but there may be some specifics that each individual person pick up on. So Jill, what are some of the things that you're looking for when you're reading an application?
Okay. I tell students that when they apply, I am their cheerleader. I am their advocate. I am Aunt Jill. My job is to look through their application and, based upon my experience at TCU, look for all of the awesome things about you. But because I'm paid by TCU, I need to be aware of things that aren't quite so awesome as well. So basically, I'm looking at what a student might want to major in, what they've done academically. So if you say you're interested in nursing, I want to know what types of science classes you've taken. What are activities or volunteer experiences that you've had? So for some of our more competitive majors, I want to do kind of a deep dive and look, at the curriculum. I also like looking when a student applies to see why they're interested in TCU. Not that the admission committee cares about that, but I'm always curious about why a student, has discovered how they've discovered TCU and why they really want to be a Horned Frog.
Great. Larissa, how would you address that question? What are you looking for on an application?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Jill said, I think that when I'm reviewing applicants for TCU, we as an institution really value a holistic review process, but also a well-rounded student. And so that goes for our applicants. The students who are at TCU are really high academically achieving, but they're also really involved outside the classroom. And so I'm looking for students that are going to be a really good fit for TCU. And to be a good fit, you don't need to fit a specific mold. However, you do have similar attributes. So those solid academics, involvement outside the classroom, leadership positions. Heath mentioned earlier, we're not expecting you to write the perfect or the best college essay. We're not expecting you to have the best resume. We're not expecting you to come in and have already been the president of 10 organizations, but we're looking for students who have interest in helping their community and being involved in their community outside the classroom, as well as academically achieving. And so that's really what I'm looking for. And there's not one specific thing, but the kind of feel of TCU is that well-rounded student. And so that's really what I'm looking for when I'm reviewing applicants at TCU.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point. And I think that term well-rounded is thrown about, and it can be misleading to students, because when you say well-rounded, what you're talking about is absolutely right for TCU. Someone who's a strong student, somebody who's engaged in the life of the community around them, somebody who thinks of the world as much as they think of themselves, et cetera. It does not mean, as some people might perceive it, that you have to be involved in 10 different clubs at the school, because there are very few students who could be a tuba player and a tennis player and student body president and right. And so it's almost a myth that we want this well-rounded in that sense. What we're looking for is a well-rounded class of students versus a class of well-rounded students, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's a great point. Okay, let's see. Next, Jennifer asks, what percentage of applicants submit a freedom of expression with their application? The answer is 36% of admitted students submitted a freedom of expression with their application. And I wonder, perhaps, Jill, you might just give a brief description of what our freedom of expression is, since that's unique to TCU.
Yeah, the freedom of expression, I believe the instructions, at least back in 2005, we told students, this is optional, it's not required, and we would love to have you submit something, if you choose to do so, that tells us more about you or expresses something that you're excited about. And I tell students at a high school visit, I explain a little bit, I give examples of some things I've seen over the years, and I'm like, if this really excites you and you're already thinking of things that you might want to submit, you probably should go for the freedom of expression. If you're sitting here rolling your eyes and thinking, lady, I don't have time to do the required things, why would I do something optional? Then probably freedom of expression is not going to be something that you're going to submit. But it just, everything is so stressful with an application. The freedom of expression for us at TCU is intended to be something fun that you can do.
Yeah. I would say it's a great way to help showcase who you are as an individual, but I can't remember a time we admitted a student who otherwise would not have been admitted just because of the freedom of expression. So I think Jill, you're exactly right. It's a great way to showcase who you are in a really fun way. And back then we asked students take an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And now, nobody writes on paper anymore anyway. So, but Larissa, that actually gets to a question that Alex has related to the freedom of expression, which is, are you able to send both a physical and a digital item for the freedom of expression, or could it only be one or the other?
Great question. We will take either. So you are welcome to, if there is something physical you want to mail our office, you are welcome to, and or you can submit something digitally. So typically digitally is going to be a little bit easier for us to see and to access and receive, but we will accept either one.
Excellent. So we touched a little bit about the essay, but we haven't talked about our short answer questions, and we have 2 required short answer questions. One asks students to look at the core values of TCU and pick one with which you identify, and the other asks students to talk about their commitment to an inclusive community using the inclusive framework, inclusive excellence framework that TCU has adopted. So Lily asks, any advice on how to write strong responses to those short answer questions? So Jill, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, great question, Lily. I think it's really important to just be authentic. You don't want to write something that you think I will like or Dean Einstein will like. You need to write something that really captures, your thought process. I typically tell students, 3 or 4 sentences, a good solid paragraph. And if I tell a student, if you're getting into 2 paragraphs, you've probably overthought your response to the question. So just make it be true to you, and don't, use AI to generate it. Don't look at what other people, how they've responded to it. Just make it about you.
Great. Larissa, anything to add to that?
The only thing I would add is that when you read those questions, your mind likely has kind of an initial thought or almost like a gut feeling of how you should respond. And that's how you should respond. Don't analyze over, okay, which of the values looks most aligns with my resume? Are they going to be able to tell? That's not what we're looking for. Whatever your gut tells you and whatever you have the ability to really speak authentically to, as Jill said, tend to be the best answers to those questions. So I would say don't overthink it. Go with your gut. Be thoughtful in your response and articulate yourself well. But the content of that response really, we don't want you to lose sleep over it. We want you to write a response that feels genuine to yourself.
Wonderful. Larissa, I'm going to throw this question to you. Melissa asks, do you take into account the rigor of the academic standards at my high school?
Fantastic question. And yes, absolutely. So the way that TCU's admission office is structured is that admission counselors like Jill and myself, we work specifically with territories so that we really have a strong relationship with those high schools. We are very aware through the application process, the level of rigor offered at a high school. Part of this is through relationship building. And then part of this is also part of what the counselor will submit to TCU when they're submitting a recommendation for a student. It gives us some insight into how many advanced courses are offered at the school. Is dual credit something that students are taking part of? How many honors classes are offered? All sorts of these things. And so we have that information as we're looking at a student's application. I know that we have students who go to high schools that say you can only take 2 AP courses per year and you can't start until your junior year. That looks a lot different to us than schools who allow students to start taking those courses their first year in high school. Neither is good nor bad, but as counselors, it's our job to know that information so that we can appropriately advocate for students who might be at more rigorous high schools that may not even offer formal advanced courses because their rigor is to a point that it is advanced and more challenging. And so we know that that's part of our job. We build relationships over time with counselors so that we understand the schools in our territory. So that was a very long answer to your pretty short question, but I think it's important to understand the nuance of what we are doing behind the scenes to ensure that students are appropriately advocated for.
Thank you, Larissa. I really appreciate that response. And it sort of dovetails into a question that Jesse asks, because you talked about the structure of our office. Jesse asks, what is the role of the regional admissions counselor during the pre-application and application process? What are appropriate issues to reach out about? Anything you don't want people reaching out to you with? So Jill, as somebody who has done this job at TCU for a number of years, and you've worked with families in the Midwestern part of the country for that entire time, can you talk about that relationship? When is a good time to reach out and when would not be a good time?
Right. Well, I want to assure you, a regional admission counselor is a legitimate full-time employee. The reason that we're regional is because we're getting a lot of applications from the area that we kind of house a regional admission counselor. So that's why we're there. We're not part-time people at all. But I would say that I tell students, I'm here to help. I want to answer their questions. Now, when I am at a high school visit, I will give a student my business card and I will tell them, for this time of year, because I'm in a rental car driving around to my different states, email can be a much better way to reach out to me. Also, I tell students with email, I can answer their question and then I can also send them a link so they can find more information. So for me, no question is off the table. So I think, you use your regional admission counselors just like you would if you were meeting with Dean Einstein or Larissa, who's campus-based. Nothing's off the table, and we're happy to help.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, it is time for dad joke number 2. Are you ready? Because last time you said you were ready, but I'm not sure you were ready. So you guys prepared for this one?
Do you want us to answer if we think we've got an answer?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
I didn't know the rules. Okay.
Okay, yes. Here's the question. I think it's easier than the first question. How many tickles does it take to make an octopus laugh? How many tickles does it take to make an octopus laugh?
They don't laugh, they'd swallow water.
You're overthinking it now. We're looking for an actual number. It's a number between 1 and 10. How about that?
Tentacles?
Tentacles. Very well done, Larissa. Okay, let's move on. We're serious now. We have many questions in the chat that have to do with standardized tests, which of course is another part for some students in the college admission process. At TCU, we have a test optional policy that has been in place now for 3 years, since the beginning of the pandemic. And we have already announced that that plan is in place, that test optional policy is in place through the high school graduating class of 2025, which is our current high school juniors. So first of all, Larissa, would you mind explaining our do no harm policy?
Yes, absolutely. So TCU's test optional policy is just like he said, do no harm, which means that your test score cannot hurt you in the process in terms of your application and scholarship eligibility. So on the back end, when we're reviewing your application for admission, if your test score is in any way pulling your application down, we just don't use it. Same thing for scholarship consideration. We do not want you to lose sleep over debating whether or not to send your test scores to us. If you think your test scores are a decent representation of your academic abilities, go ahead and send them to us, because you don't necessarily know, right? You don't know exactly how you're going to look when we're looking at the entire picture of our applicant pool. And so send it to us. It's unfair of us to allow that to harm you. And so we want to be ethical in our process to make sure that we are giving you every opportunity to be admitted and to get those scholarship dollars. We don't want you to be allowed to harm yourself in the process. So don't overthink it. It's not a trick. There's nothing nefarious happening on the back end. We promise it's do no harm. That's our process. That's our policy. So send us your test scores and don't overthink it.
That's great. So that sort of begs the question that Laura asks, and other people have asked this too as well, what % of accepted applicants applied test optional for 2023? The answer is 55% of our admitted students used test scores or had their test scores used in the process. 45% therefore did not have their test scores and were still admitted to TCU. So you can see there are plenty of students at the university who have been admitted and enrolled without the use of test scores. We now have enough data here in our third year to have gone back and looked at sort of the efficacy of our policy. So looking at students' academic record coming into TCU, how they've fared at the university, how we retain them between their first and their second year, the credits they amass, all sorts of metrics that help us understand student success. The difference between students who had test scores as part of the consideration of their application and those who didn't, the difference is basically nothing. Students who come to TCU without use of test scores are succeeding at essentially the same rate. So while we don't yet have any sort of permanent policy one way or the other, we're in the process of working through the logistics on that. So far, the numbers are very strong. The overall retention rate at the university this year, by the way, is 94%. That percentage, what we call retention, that's the percent of students who persist between their first and second years at the university. That is a very high rate. That is favorable to just about every college in the United States. So if students were coming to TCU and not succeeding as a result of not having supplied us with test scores, we would know that based on their dropping out between their first and the second year. The fact that this is the highest retention rate we've ever had in TCU history suggests that things are going pretty well in that respect. So we feel really, really good about that. Okay, let's move on to the next question, which is, someone asked, I forget who it was, but someone asked a question about what happens if they take a standardized test, just keeping on this theme, in October, but they're applying by one of our November deadlines. Jill, is that still okay? Would we be able to see their test result?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had that one twice at school visits today. That question came up. So there are a lot of students taking an October exam. But our deadline is November 1st. So you have the opportunity when you apply to indicate, yes, I do want to have test scores factored in, or no, I don't want my scores factored in. So I think the biggest thing for students to think about, since the deadline is November 1st, you don't know for sure that you want them submitted because you want to wait and see what your score is. So a student could say, no, I don't want my scores considered. But then let's say it's the first week of November and they find out what their score is. You can go into your TCU application portal and we allow you to change your answer to the test optional question. And at that point in time, if you choose to do so, change it to yes, I do want my scores considered. And then you can just self-report what your test scores are. We don't need official scores during the application process. We only need them later on. If a student was admitted with scores reported and they end up coming to TCU, we need them, after May 1st and before you come to TCU. But that's what I would say if a student asked me about that October test date.
Great. Thank you, Jill. Okay, Larissa. Lee asks, do you look at 9th through 11th grades for cumulative GPA or just 10th and 11th? And this is a really interesting question. I bet you there are a lot of Californians who are wondering this because in California, in the UC system, they only look at 10th and 11th grades. At least they did when I was a high school student years ago. So Larissa, what would you say about that for us?
So we're looking at your 9th through 11th grade grades. So we're looking at everything in high school. However, we understand that there might be some ebbs and flows in there. And so it's a great time in your application if you had a little bit of a dip, or if we can see what we call an upward trajectory, which means that as you've gone through high school, your grades get a little bit better. We are considering all of that as well. So we consider all of them 9th through 11th. Like Heath said, the California system is different and we know we get a lot of overlap there, but we're looking at 9th through 11th, but we're really still utilizing that holistic review process, which means that we're not only looking at the GPA. So when Jill and I are reading applications, we don't just look at the GPA and call it a day. We read the entire transcript. We're looking at the classes. We're looking at the course trajectory. There might have been a reason that you had a little dip in grades one semester. Something might have happened personally. You're welcome to explain that to us. And all of that is considered when we're looking at your overall grades for your application.
Excellent. Jill, question for you. Keith asks, what are the proper steps to complete to be considered for the Chancellor Scholarship? And that's an important question because we've changed our process a little bit this year. And then also, my daughter is a junior this year. When should she start putting in for this? So Jill, how would you respond to Keith's questions?
All right. The Chancellor Scholarship is it's the awesome scholarship. Everybody wants it because it's a full tuition scholarship for 4 years. The way that it works, I tell students, we have about 21,000 students who applied at least last year, okay? About 1,000 of those applicants were just standout, stellar academic students. Straight A's, some submitted test scores, some did not, taking very rigorous coursework. When the admission staff looks at those 1,000, We also look at their leadership. So as Larissa said earlier, well-rounded, a good student in the classroom and a great person, an involved person outside of the classroom. With those students that are considered quite deeply for the Chancellor Scholarship, their resume is amazing. They're involved in a lot of different activities. They're officers of some. Maybe they started a club or organization at their school. Maybe they started their own business. Maybe they did something really unique to help people during the pandemic. So we look at about 1,000 students, strong academics, strong leadership, and then of that group, the admission counseling staff will vote on about 150 to travel to campus in February to do an interview process with staff, faculty, leadership here at the university. And then of that 150 who interview, about 50 to 55 are actually awarded a Chancellor Scholarship each year. So that's kind of how that funnels down. So yeah, it's a full tuition scholarship for about 50 to 55 students per year.
Yeah. And in terms of when to start that process, your daughter, Keith, is a junior. She won't start that until the application opens next August 1st. So she has plenty of time. Okay. So Jill, you mentioned that we had 21,000 applications at least last year. Hint, hint. We might see a few more this year. I'm not sure if you all are aware that our football team played in the national championship game last year. Probably you knew that. There is an expected residual effect in terms of application bounce. And so far, although it is very early in the process, our application opened less than 2 months ago, we have seen a bit of an increase in applications, but still far too early to know what that final number is going to be. So Jessica asks, do you anticipate accepting more students than last year? I don't know that we're going to accept more students because our entering first year class size is likely going to be very similar to what we saw this year. So in terms of the number of offers we're going to make, it may be very similar to last year. But of course, that is on a denominator number of applications that could be bigger. So the admit rate, the percent of students we accept may go down, but the number of students we accept is likely to be fairly similar. This is all conjecture at this point because we still have a lot of information that is as of yet unknown, specifically what our applicant pool looks like. So, and just to put a little bit of a little more additional context here, provide more context, our entering first year class this fall that started just a few weeks ago was 2,488. In the fall of 2022, that number was 2,491, so almost exactly the same. And we admitted about 87 or 8,800 students in order to get to that 2,488. So the admit rate this past year was about 42%, just in case you were curious about that. Okay, next question is from Jennifer, and I'm going to ask this of you, Larissa. Jennifer asks, if you apply early decision and you don't get in, can you be deferred or reapply? What are the possible decisions that an early decision applicant would get from us?
Great question. So for an early decision applicant, we give really one of two answers, and that is accept or deny for the most part. And that is because if TCU is your number one choice, we want to give you clarity so that you can continue to pursue other options. It's not because we're mean, it's because we want to ensure that if we are denying an early decision applicant, that they have the time to go and establish where else they might want to decide to go to college. Now, early action, on the other hand, the decision options can be admit, deny, or defer, which is where we will ask students for their first semester senior year grades and then reevaluate them with a regular decision pool. So Heath, anything to add or clarify on that?
No,
okay.
I think that pretty much sums it up. Wonderful. Okay, let's go back. This is kind of a fun question. Let's go back to a question that was asked on Instagram before our little chat here started, and that is, what are your tips to stay cool in the first weeks on campus? Because it is brutally hot in August when the fall semester begins. So, what should we tell Danielle Moore? Let's see. Larissa, let's start with you as a Texas native.
I was going to say, Jill gets the cool weather where she's at. So my tips to stay cool are wear comfortable clothes and comfortable shoes, because you'll be walking a little bit more than you likely were in high school, and you will likely be sweating. So athletic wear you will see around campus a lot for ease and comfort, and also having a good handy water bottle that you fill with ice water. It sounds silly, but it really does help. Instead of just filling up regular water, you can go fill that up at Market Square, or a lot of the different residence halls have ice machines and things. So fill it up with ice water, wear athletic clothing, and part of it is just a mentality. It's going to be hot. You can't do anything about it. So it is what it is. But we love the heat, and we also love the fall when the temperature drops like it has this week. We've been very happy about that. But those are my tips.
Yeah, it's amazing how like 85 degrees can feel like 60. It's great. It's great. Jill, do you have any tips on? Let's expand just to sort of adjusting to the fall, coming to school.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for the heat, the only thing I would add is if you have long hair, hair clips are a girl's or a guy's best friend. Get that hair off your neck. You'll be a lot cooler. Tips. Oh, this is a great one because I work with students from the upper Midwest. So I like to remind the guys, like, you need to open doors. It's going to be expected in the culture that's Texas. So, and guys in Minnesota and Illinois and Iowa are really nice guys. But if you don't hold doors open down here, you're really going to stand out. The other thing about kind of transitioning to campus is there's a word they use called y'all, and there's like 4 different types of y'all. So you might, if you need anybody to tutor you as a regional, I can email me. I'll help walk you through the y'all process. But I would say over your summer before college, just be independent, get outside because yes, it's going to be hot. And just get ready to have fun and buy a lot of purple clothing because you're going to love wearing purple at TCU.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I will co-sign on everything that was just said, especially about staying hydrated. That's so important during football games. Unless it's a 7 p.m. game, whether it's an 11 or a 2 o'clock, 2:30 game, whatever that time slot is, you're going to be baking in the sun. And you definitely need to stay hydrated with lots and lots of water. So make sure that you're doing that. Okay, we have gone for the full hour, y'all. And I think you both did a fantabulous job. Thank you very much. And thank all of you for joining us again. We love doing these Facebook Lives session. We're going to be back in just a couple of weeks. With an incredible group of students. We're going to have a student panel in a couple of weeks who can talk to you all about life at TCU. So back by popular demand, we're going to have current living, breathing TCU students representing all facets of university life. So with that, we will sign off. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always,